I found my son's car keys 3 weeks after the funeral. They were sitting in a small dish by the front door, right where he always dropped them when he came home. I don't know why it took me so long to notice them. Maybe I wasn't ready to see them. My name is Robert. I'm 63 years old. I spent 32 years working at a lumber yard outside of Columbus, Ohio. My hands are rough. My back gives me trouble in the winter, and 3 weeks ago I buried my only son, Daniel. He was 34. A car accident on Route 9, late at night, driving home from somewhere he never told me about. The keys sat in that dish for 3 weeks because every time I looked at them, I saw his hand reaching for them. I saw him laughing at something on his phone as he walked out the door. I saw the last morning I ever saw him alive, when he grabbed a cup of coffee off my kitchen counter and said, "Love you, Dad. I'll call you tonight." He never called. My wife Carol passed 4 years ago, cancer. So, after Daniel died, it was just me in this house. Just me and his old Ford Explorer sitting in the driveway, covered in a thin layer of dust because I couldn't bring myself to drive it. I couldn't bring myself to sell it either. My neighbor, a good man named Walter, kept telling me I needed to do something with that car. "You can't just let it sit there, Robert," he said one evening over the fence. "Either drive it or sell it. Sitting there staring at it isn't going to bring him back." I knew he was right, but knowing something and being ready for it are two different things. So, on a quiet Tuesday morning, I finally picked up those keys. My hand shook a little. I walked out to the driveway in my work jacket, the same one I've had for 15 years, and I opened the door of my son's car for the first time since he died. The smell hit me first, his cologne. A gas station coffee cup in the console. A gym bag in the back seat that he probably meant to wash out weeks ago. I sat behind the wheel for a long time before I turned the key. When the engine started, the radio came on too loud. Some rock station Daniel used to listen to. I turned it down with a hand that still wasn't steady. And that's when I noticed the GPS screen light up on the dashboard. Now, before I go any further, if you're just finding this channel, I want to say welcome. If stories like mine mean something to you, hit that subscribe button and tap the like on this video. It helps more than you know, and I'd love to know. Where are you watching this from tonight? Drop your city in the comments. I read every single one. Now, back to that morning. The GPS screen showed something called recent destinations. I don't know why I tapped it. Maybe I was looking for a piece of him. Some proof he had a normal, simple life, work, the gym, the grocery store. Things a father wants to see. Instead, I found an address I didn't recognize. Not once, not twice. The same address over and over, going back almost a year. Every Thursday evening. Sometimes Sunday afternoons too, 141 Ashcroft Lane. I sat there in my son's car, in my own driveway, staring at those 5 words like they were written in another language. Daniel didn't have friends on Ashcroft Lane. I knew all his friends. I knew his co-workers from the insurance office where he worked. I knew his ex-girlfriend, Melissa, from 2 years back. None of them lived on that side of town. A light rain started to fall, tapping against the windshield. I remember thinking how strange it was, sitting in a dead man's car, learning something new about him for the first time since he was buried. My first thought was simple. Maybe it was work. Maybe there was a client he visited every week. But work doesn't explain a Thursday evening visit every single week for almost a year. And it doesn't explain why he never once mentioned it. Not at Sunday dinner. Not on the phone. Not ever. I sat there long enough that Walter noticed from his porch and walked over, tapping on the passenger window. I rolled it down. "You all right, Robert?" I looked at him, and I don't know what my face looked like, but it made him stop smiling. "Daniel was going somewhere," I said. "Every week, somewhere he never told me about." Walter's eyebrows pulled together. "What do you mean?" I turned the GPS screen toward him so he could see it. He was quiet for a moment. "Could be anything, Robert. Don't go jumping to conclusions." But I already knew myself well enough. I wasn't going to sleep that night wondering. I wasn't built that way. I spent my whole life being the kind of man who finishes what he starts, who doesn't leave a job half done. And this felt like unfinished business. My son's business. That night I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in front of me, and I wrote the address down on a piece of paper like it was something sacred. 1417 Ashcroft Lane. I stared at those words until my eyes hurt. I thought about calling Melissa. I thought about calling Daniel's coworker, Greg, who came to the funeral, and shook my hand a little too long, like he wanted to say something and didn't. I thought about 100 small things from the last year that I hadn't paid attention to. The way Daniel sometimes canceled our Thursday phone calls last minute. The way he seemed distracted at Christmas. The way he flinched, just slightly, when I asked him once if he was seeing anyone. "Nothing serious, Dad," he'd said. "Don't worry about it." I hadn't worried about it. I trusted him. He was a grown man. He didn't owe me an explanation for every hour of his life. But now he was gone, and there was an address burned into my mind, and a whole year of Thursdays I knew nothing about. I didn't sleep much that night. Around 5 in the morning, I made a decision. I was going to drive to that address. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed to understand what my son had been keeping from me. The next morning, I put on a clean shirt, like I was going somewhere important, even though I didn't fully understand why that mattered to me. I picked up Daniel's car keys again. This time, my hand wasn't shaking. I got in the car, typed nothing into the GPS, because it was already there, saved, waiting. I just pressed the top result under recent destinations and watched the little blue line appear on the screen, leading me somewhere across town, into a neighborhood I had never once visited in my 63 years of living in this city. As I pulled out of my driveway, Walter was standing on his porch again, watching me with a concerned look. I didn't stop to explain. I just gave him a small nod, and he nodded back, like he understood that some things a man has to do alone. 20 minutes later, the GPS voice said the words that I will never forget. "You have arrived at your destination." I looked up from the road, and my hands went still on the steering wheel. There, in front of me, was a small house with a blue front door, a porch light still on from the night before, and in the driveway, a child's bicycle leaned against the garage. I had no idea whose house this was. I had no idea why my son came here every week. But I knew, sitting there in his car, staring at that blue door, that my life was about to change. I sat in the car for almost 10 minutes before I found the courage to turn off the engine. The street was quiet. A few kids rode bikes further down the block. Somewhere a lawnmower was running. It was such an ordinary street for something that felt so heavy. The house itself was small but well kept. White siding, blue shutters that matched the front door, a porch with 2 wicker chairs, and a little wind chime that moved gently even though there wasn't much wind. Someone took care of this place. Someone who noticed small things. I thought about turning around. I thought about driving straight home and putting those car keys back in that dish by the door and never touching them again. But I had spent 32 years at a lumber yard learning that some boards, once you start cutting, you finish the cut. You don't walk away halfway through, so I got out of the car. My legs felt strange walking up that path like they belonged to someone else. I stood on the porch for a moment, staring at the blue door, my heart pounding harder than it had in years. Then I knocked. It took a moment before I heard footsteps. The door opened, and a woman stood there. She looked to be in her early 30s, dark hair pulled back, wearing a cardigan even though it wasn't cold. Her face was pleasant, tired in the way that mothers get tired, and completely unfamiliar to me. For a moment, we just looked at each other. "Can I help you?" she asked. "My name is Robert," I said. My voice came out rougher than I meant it to. I think my son used to visit this house." Her expression changed the moment I said his name. Before I even finished the sentence, I watched her face go pale. "Daniel," she said quietly. It wasn't a question hearing her say his name like that. Like she knew him, like she had said it 100 times before, hit me harder than I expected. I had to steady myself against the porch railing. "Yes," I said, "Daniel was my son." Her eyes filled with tears almost instantly. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I heard about the accident. I wanted to come to the funeral. I didn't know if I should." She introduced herself as Sarah. She invited me inside, and I followed her into a small living room with toys scattered across the floor, a worn couch, and photographs on the wall of a little boy at different ages. Sarah asked if I wanted coffee, and I said yes, mostly because I needed something to do with my hands. While she was in the kitchen, I looked closer at the photographs. And that's when I saw it. A photo of the little boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old, standing next to Daniel, my son, smiling. His arm around this child like it was the most natural thing in the world. My chest tightened. Sarah came back into the room and saw me staring at the photo. She stopped in the doorway, coffee mugs in her hands, like she was deciding whether to explain or wait for me to ask. "Who is that boy?" I asked, even though some part of me already suspected the answer. She set the mugs down slowly. "That's Ethan," she said. My son. I waited. He's 7, she continued. Daniel has been coming here every week for almost 2 years. The room felt like it was tilting slightly. Is he? I couldn't finish the sentence. Sarah shook her head quickly. No, Ethan isn't Daniel's son. I need you to understand that clearly. Relief and confusion mixed together in my chest. Then I don't understand. We sat down at her small kitchen table and Sarah told me the story slowly, like she was choosing each word carefully. She had been married once to a man named Marcus, Ethan's father. Marcus had struggled with addiction for years, and one night, driving drunk with Ethan in the car, he crashed. Ethan survived. Marcus did not. Ethan was 3 when it happened, Sarah said, her voice steady but heavy. He doesn't remember his father much, just pieces. I sat there listening, my untouched coffee going cold in front of me, waiting to understand what any of this had to do with my son. Daniel and I met at a grief support group, Sarah said. About 2 years ago. I was there because of Marcus. He was there because, she paused, because of your wife, Carol. I hadn't expected to hear my late wife's name in that kitchen. My throat tightened. He said losing his mother broke something in him that he didn't know how to talk about with anyone, Sarah continued. Especially not with you. He said you were already carrying so much grief of your own. He didn't want to add to it. I remembered those months after Carol passed. Daniel had seemed fine on the outside. Steady. Strong. He was the one comforting me, not the other way around. I had no idea he was drowning quietly somewhere I couldn't see. We started talking after group sessions, Sarah said. Just talking at first. About grief. About feeling stuck. Then he started coming around more. He was good with Ethan. Really good. She looked down at her hands. Ethan latched onto him fast. Too fast, maybe. But Daniel never pushed him away. He started showing up on Thursdays because that was the night Ethan had trouble sleeping. The night that was hardest for him. Daniel would come over, help with homework, watch a movie, sometimes just sit with him until he fell asleep. I felt something crack open in my chest, something between pride and grief so tangled together I couldn't separate them. Why didn't he tell me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah looked at me with something like sympathy. I asked him that once, he said. She hesitated. He said you already lost a wife. He didn't want you to get attached to a woman and a little boy who weren't officially anything. He said, if things between us ever became serious, he'd tell you properly. He wanted to protect you from more loss, not add another person you might lose too. I sat in that kitchen, a place I didn't know existed 24 hours earlier, learning that my son had built a second life out of love and grief and quiet protection, and he had never said a word. Sarah reached into a drawer and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He wrote something for Ethan's birthday last month. He never got to give it to him. She hesitated before sliding it across the table to me. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. It was a short letter, written in Daniel's handwriting, the same handwriting I used to see on birthday cards and school projects 30 years ago. I read the first line, and my vision blurred with tears before I could finish it. Ethan, I know I'm not your dad. I would never try to replace him, but I want you to know that showing up for you every week has meant more to me than you'll ever understand. I couldn't read any further. I set the letter down on the table and pressed my hand over my mouth. Sarah reached over and gently touched my arm. I didn't know how to reach you, she said. I didn't have your number. Daniel kept our worlds separate, even from me sometimes. I only knew your name because he mentioned it once or twice. We sat in silence for a while. Somewhere down the hall, I could hear the quiet sound of a video game, and I realized Ethan was home, in his room, unaware that the man on the porch was connected to the person he'd lost twice now, in different ways. Does he know? I asked. Sarah's eyes filled again. He knows Daniel isn't coming back. He doesn't fully understand why yet. He keeps asking when Daniel is going to visit on Thursday. Something in me shifted at that moment. Sitting in a stranger's kitchen, holding half of my son's handwriting, I understood that grief doesn't end where I thought it did. It doesn't stop with the people who share your last name. It follows love wherever love went. And apparently, Daniel's love had gone here, to this small house with the blue door, every single Thursday, for almost 2 years, without me ever knowing. Before I left that day, I stood on the porch with Sarah, unsure of what came next. My whole understanding of my son had shifted in the span of one conversation. Part of me felt betrayed by the secrecy. Part of me felt an aching pride I didn't know what to do with. I'd like to see Ethan, I said finally. if that's all right with you." Sarah studied my face for a long moment, like she was deciding whether I was steady enough for that step. Then she nodded slowly. "He would probably like that, but maybe not today. Let me talk to him first. Let him understand a little." I understood. I drove home that afternoon with the windows down, the fall air cutting through the car, my mind spinning with everything I had just learned. But what I didn't know yet, as I pulled back into my driveway, was that Sarah wasn't the only person Daniel had been keeping secrets from. There was someone else. Someone who was about to make things far more complicated than a boy who missed his Thursday visitor. The next few days passed slowly. I found myself doing something I hadn't done since Carol got sick. Waking up every morning with a reason to move, a reason to think about something other than the empty rooms of my house. I kept thinking about Ethan, about that letter, about the version of my son I never got to fully know. On Thursday, exactly 1 week after I first drove to Ashcroft Lane, my phone rang. It was Sarah. "Ethan would like to meet you," she said, "if you're still willing." I told her I'd be there within the hour. When I arrived, Ethan was sitting on the porch steps, swinging a small toy truck back and forth in his hands. He looked up at me with wide, careful eyes, the kind of eyes that already understood loss better than most adults do. "Are you Daniel's dad?" he asked before I even reached the steps. "I am," I said, lowering myself down beside him, my knees protesting the whole way. "My name is Robert." He studied me for a moment. "You have the same eyes as him." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded, and we sat together in silence for a while. Two people who had lost the same person in very different ways. "He used to help me with my reading homework," Ethan said eventually, "and he always let me pick the movie, even when it was a bad one." I laughed a small broken laugh, the first real laugh I'd had in weeks. That sounds like him. Over the next hour, sitting with Ethan and Sarah in that small living room, I began to understand the shape of the life my son had built here. Small things. Grocery runs on Sunday afternoons, helping fix a leaking faucet, teaching Ethan how to ride a bike in the driveway last summer. Sarah showed me more photos. Daniel at Ethan's school event, standing in the back so he wouldn't take attention away from Sarah. Daniel fixing the porch light. Daniel asleep on the couch with Ethan curled up beside him, a blanket half fallen off both of them. It was a whole world. A quiet, careful, deliberately hidden world. "He was planning to tell you," Sarah said as Ethan went to grab a toy from his room. "Soon. He told me that at Thanksgiving. He said he wanted to wait until things felt more settled, until he was sure." "Sure of what?" I asked. She hesitated. "Sure that I wouldn't disappear too. I think losing your wife made him afraid of loving people who might leave." I thought about my own grief after Carol died, how I had pulled inward, how I had let Daniel comfort me without ever asking what he needed in return. Guilt settled heavy in my chest. That guilt followed me home that evening, and it was still sitting there Friday morning when I got a call I wasn't expecting. It was from a man named Craig Dobbins. He introduced himself as Daniel's landlord, calling about the apartment lease. "I know this is a hard time," Craig said, "but someone came by yesterday asking about Daniel's belongings. Said she was his fiancée, wanted to know if she could start clearing out the apartment." I stood very still in my kitchen. "His fiancée?" "Yes, sir. A woman named Vanessa. She had a key already, so I let her in before I realized I probably should have called you first." My hand tightened around the phone. Daniel had never mentioned anyone named Vanessa. Not once. Not at Thanksgiving. Not at Christmas. Not in any of our Sunday phone calls. "Did she say how long they'd been together?" I asked. "She mentioned they were planning a wedding for next spring," Craig said. "I'm sorry, I assumed you knew. I hadn't known anything." I drove to Daniel's apartment that same afternoon, my mind racing the entire way. When I arrived, there were already several boxes stacked near the door, and a woman I had never seen before was standing in the middle of the living room, going through a drawer of my son's things like she had every right to be there. She turned when she heard me come in. She was polished, well-dressed, the kind of woman who looked like she belonged in an office building downtown. She studied me for a moment before recognition crossed her face. "You must be Robert," she said, setting down the drawer's contents. "Daniel talked about you." "I can't say the same," I said, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. "I've never heard your name before yesterday." Something flickered across her face, there and gone quickly. "We were together for almost 3 years," she said. "We were engaged. I have the ring to prove it." 3 years. That was longer than Daniel had known Sarah. He never mentioned you, I said. Not once. Vanessa's jaw tightened. We kept things private. Daniel wanted to focus on his career before making a big announcement. We were going to tell everyone at Christmas this year. I looked around the apartment. Nothing here looked like it belonged to a woman planning a wedding. No photographs of her, no shared belongings that I could see. Just Daniel's things, exactly as he'd left them. I need to take some of his things, Vanessa said, moving toward the bedroom. Sentimental items. Things that mean something to me. Something about the way she said it. Too smooth, too rehearsed, made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I followed her into the bedroom and watched as she opened Daniel's closet and began going through it with a familiarity that felt less like grief and more like inventory. Vanessa, I said carefully, were you and Daniel actually engaged, or is this something else? She turned to face me, and for just a second the polished expression cracked. Daniel had a life insurance policy, she said finally. A good one. Through his job. I helped him fill out the paperwork 2 years ago. He listed me as a beneficiary. The room went quiet except for the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. How much? I asked. $200,000, she said, and I intend to collect what's owed to me. I left that apartment with my hands shaking and drove straight to the small law office of an old friend, Walter's cousin, a man named Philip Hayes who had handled Carol's estate years earlier. I sat across from his desk and told him everything. Sarah, Ethan, the letter, and now, this woman claiming to be Daniel's fiancée, sitting in his apartment, going through his things, talking about a life insurance payout like it was a business transaction. Philip listened carefully, took notes, and finally set his pen down. Robert, he said slowly, I need you to understand something. If she's truly listed as the primary beneficiary on that policy, and the paperwork is legitimate, there may not be much you can do to stop the payout. But if she wasn't really his fiancée, I said, if this whole relationship was some kind of lie, then that's a very different conversation, Philip said. But you'd need proof, real proof, not just a feeling that something's wrong. I sat there gripping the arms of the chair, thinking about Sarah's small house with the blue door, about Ethan's letter, about a woman I had just met who seemed more interested in Daniel's assets than his memory. I'll find proof, I said. Whatever it takes. Philip studied me for a long moment. There's something else you should know, he said carefully. I pulled some basic records this morning after your call, just to get ahead of things. And Vanessa Cole isn't her real last name, he said. At least not the one on her legal documents. Her legal name is Vanessa Whitfield, and Robert, this isn't the first insurance policy she's been listed on. My stomach turned to ice. There was another one 4 years ago, Philip continued, sliding a folder across the desk toward me. A man named Gregory Simmons, similar situation. Sudden death, Vanessa listed as beneficiary. The payout was contested by his family, but eventually released. I stared at the folder without opening it, my hands frozen in my lap. Robert, Philip said quietly, I don't want to jump to conclusions, but I think you need to ask yourself a very hard question. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. Are you certain your son's accident on Route 9 was really an accident? I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with the folder Philip gave me, reading through pages about a man named Gregory Simmons, a stranger who had died 4 years ago under circumstances that suddenly felt less like a coincidence and more like a pattern. Gregory had been 41. A single accident, late at night, on a quiet stretch of road outside of Dayton. No witnesses. His car had gone off the road and into a ravine. The report said he'd been drinking, though his family insisted he barely touched alcohol. Vanessa had been his fiancée for 8 months at the time of his death. She had collected on a policy worth $180,000. I read it 3 times before I could make myself close the folder. The next morning, I called Detective Marcus Rayleigh, the officer who had originally handled Daniel's accident report. I told him everything: Sarah, the insurance policy, Vanessa, Gregory Simmons. He was quiet for a long moment on the other end of the line. Mr. Hendricks, he said finally, I want to be straight with you. Your son's accident was ruled a single vehicle crash. No signs of another car involved. No skid marks suggesting he was run off the road. Then how do you explain this? I asked, my voice rising despite myself. This woman has done this before. I'm not saying it's nothing, Riley said carefully. I'm saying we need to be careful before we start making accusations. Give me some time. I'll pull the full report again. I'll look at the toxicology results more closely. 2 days passed. I spent them at Sarah's house more than my own, sitting with Ethan, learning small pieces of Daniel I hadn't known. Sarah told me Daniel had mentioned only once, feeling uneasy about something in his relationship with Vanessa in the weeks before he died. He said she'd been asking him strange questions, Sarah told me, sitting across from me at her kitchen table. About his benefits at work, about what would happen to his accounts if something happened to him. He laughed it off at the time. Said maybe she was just being practical. I felt sick hearing it. On the 3rd day, Rayleigh called and asked me to come to the station. When I arrived, he led me into a small office and slid a folder across his desk, much like Philip had done days earlier. We re-examined the toxicology report, he said. Your son's blood alcohol level was elevated the night of the crash, higher than what would be expected for someone who, according to everyone we've spoken to, rarely drank. Daniel didn't drink, I said firmly. Not like that. Never. That's what concerned us too, Riley said. So we looked deeper. There was a substance in his system that doesn't typically appear in a routine toxicology screen. Something that can cause impaired coordination and drowsiness when mixed with even a small amount of alcohol. My hands curled into fists on my knees. Are you saying someone drugged him? I'm saying it's now an active investigation, Riley said. We pulled phone records. Vanessa called Daniel twice that evening, the night of the accident. The last call ended 9 minutes before the crash was reported. Over the following 2 weeks, the investigation moved faster than I expected. Detectives interviewed Vanessa twice. The second time, her story shifted in small but noticeable ways. She claimed she hadn't seen Daniel that night, despite the phone records showing otherwise. She claimed she didn't know about Gregory Simmons's case, despite records showing she had used a different last name for that relationship entirely. Rayleigh called me on a Tuesday evening, his voice careful but certain. We found something at her apartment during a search, he said. A substance matching what was in your son's system, and documents connecting her to a third relationship, 2 states over, currently active. Another one, I said quietly. Another one, Riley confirmed. Robert, I think you should know, based on what we're seeing, this appears to be a pattern going back almost 7 years. I sat with that information for a long time after we hung up. 3 men, 3 families torn apart. And somewhere in the middle of it, my son, who had spent the last 2 years of his life quietly loving a woman, and her son who weren't even his own family, while unknowingly tangled up with someone capable of something so calculated and cruel. The trial took months to reach its conclusion. I sat in that courtroom more days than I can count, watching Vanessa Whitfield's composed expression crack piece by piece as evidence was laid out. Financial records showing a pattern of debt she'd been hiding. Text messages to a friend, months before Daniel's death, complaining about needing money and mentioning his insurance policy by name. And finally, toxicology and pharmacy records connecting her to the substance found in Daniel's system. The jury took less than 6 hours to reach a verdict, guilty. On all counts, including 2 prior cases that were reopened once investigators saw the pattern clearly. I sat in that courtroom, gripping the wooden bench, feeling something I hadn't expected to feel. Not joy, not victory, just a quiet, exhausted relief, the kind that comes after carrying something heavy for a very long time, and finally being allowed to set it down. Sarah was waiting for me outside, on the courthouse steps when it was over. She hadn't come inside for most of the trial, choosing instead to protect Ethan from the details, but she'd come today for the verdict. It's over, I told her, my voice hoarse from months of tension finally releasing. She nodded, tears in her eyes, and hugged me the way family hugs each other, not the way strangers do. The insurance company, once the criminal case was resolved, reversed the payout to Vanessa entirely. Instead, because Daniel had never formally updated his beneficiary information after listing her years earlier under different pretenses, and because the policy documents were proven to be obtained under fraudulent circumstances, the funds were eventually redirected. Half went into a trust for Ethan's education, something I insisted on once I understood how much my son had loved that boy. The other half I used to establish something Daniel would have wanted, though he never got the chance to build it himself. 6 months after the trial ended, I stood in a small building I had purchased and renovated on the edge of town, once an old hardware store, now something new. A community grief support space, the same kind of place where Daniel had met Sarah, where broken people could sit together and not feel so alone in their loss. We named it the Thursday House. Ethan helped me paint the front door. We chose blue, the same shade as Sarah's front door, though neither of us said why out loud. We didn't need to. I still visit Sarah and Ethan every week now, not because I'm trying to replace what Daniel started, but because somewhere along the way, without meaning to, we became family, real family, the kind built through choice and grief and quiet Thursday evenings, not just blood. Ethan calls me Grandpa Robert now. He asked me once if that was okay, like he was afraid the word might not belong to him. I told him it belonged to him more than almost anything else in my life. I think about Daniel every single day, not with the same sharp, breathless grief I carried in those first weeks, but with something steadier now. Pride, mostly. Pride in the quiet, careful way he loved people, even when it meant carrying secrets he thought would protect me. He was wrong about one thing, though. He thought telling me about Sarah and Ethan would be adding more weight to my grief. Instead, it gave me somewhere to put it. It gave me a reason to keep opening my front door every morning, instead of just staring at it. Some evenings, I sit on my own porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun go down the same way I used to when Carol was still alive, when Daniel was still just down the hall as a boy. The house is quieter now than it used to be, but it isn't empty anymore, not really. I found my son's car keys 3 weeks after his funeral, sitting in a small dish by the door. I thought at the time that they were just keys, a small, ordinary object left behind. I didn't know they would lead me to a family I never knew I had. I didn't know they would help expose a woman who had hurt people before and would have hurt more if we hadn't looked closer. And I didn't know that grief, when you follow it honestly instead of running from it, can sometimes lead you somewhere unexpected, somewhere that, against all odds, feels a little bit like home.